Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you fall asleep, so before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're from and what time you're watching this, so leave it in the comments. Enjoy it. What hunts in the Grand Canyon after dark? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Colorado River as 5 rafts drifted toward Granite Rapids. Maya checked her GPS one last time before tucking it into her waterproof bag. According to the park ranger's instructions, they should have made camp an hour ago at Granite Camp, but Darius had convinced the group to push further. "Trust me," he'd said with that cocky grin that had charmed them all into this excursion. "I know a spot that's not on any official map. My uncle showed me years ago. A hidden cove past the rapids with an overhang that'll shelter us if it rains." Maya glanced nervously at the canyon walls towering above them. The red rock formations glowed crimson in the fading light, beautiful but imposing. The Grand Canyon wasn't forgiving of mistakes, and camping outside designated areas wasn't just against park rules. It could be dangerous. "We're breaking at least 3 regulations," she reminded the group as they navigated through the churning white water. "If rangers catch us, they'll revoke our permits." "Relax," Darius called back from the lead raft. "Rangers don't patrol this section at night. Too remote." The group consisted of 5 friends who'd met in college. Maya, the cautious planner; Darius, the self-proclaimed adventure expert; Kayla, a geology PhD student; Trent, a wildlife photographer; and Chris, who'd barely been outdoors before this trip but had tagged along at Darius's insistence. As they rounded the bend past Granite Rapids, Darius pointed to a narrow opening in the canyon wall. "There. See that crevice? We paddle hard to the right." The current fought against them, but they managed to guide their rafts into a concealed inlet that widened into a small sandy beach. Above them, a natural shelf in the rock face created a partial ceiling. "Hermit Formation limestone," Kayla said, running her fingers along the striated rock. "These layers are about 280 million years old. Perfect spot to hide from the elements. And prying eyes," Darius said, already unloading gear. Chris looked uneasy as he surveyed their surroundings. "Doesn't this place seem, I don't know, off somehow?" Maya felt it too, something unsettling about the cove. The air felt different here, heavier, with an odd metallic smell. "It's just because the sun's going down," Trent said, though he didn't sound convinced. He pointed his camera upward to capture the last light on the canyon walls and frowned at the viewfinder. "That's weird. There's some kind of distortion in all my shots." As they set up camp, Maya noticed peculiar markings on the cave walls that resembled claw marks, too uniform to be natural erosion. When she pointed them out, Kayla examined them closely. "These don't match any erosion pattern I've studied," she admitted. "And they look recent. Probably just other rafters who found this spot," Darius said dismissively. "Let's get a fire going before it's completely dark." As night fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. Their small fire cast dancing shadows against the rock walls, and the Colorado River gurgled past their hidden cove. The stars appeared one by one, brilliantly clear in the pollution-free sky. "I brought something to liven up the evening," Darius announced, pulling a bottle of whiskey from his bag. As they passed the bottle around, Chris suddenly stiffened. "Did you guys hear that?" They fell silent. At first, there was only the sound of the river and the crackling fire. Then, a faint scraping noise from somewhere above them. "Probably just rocks settling," Kayla said. "These formations contract as they cool at night." But the sound came again, more distinctly this time, a deliberate rhythmic scraping like claws on stone. "Mountain lion," Trent whispered, reaching slowly for his camera. Maya shook her head. "They don't usually come this close to the river." The scraping stopped, replaced by something worse, a low, guttural clicking sound that echoed through their cove. That's not an animal I recognize, Chris said, his voice tight with fear. Darius stood up, shining his flashlight toward the upper reaches of their shelter. The beam caught nothing unusual, just red rock and shadows. Just the wind playing tricks, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. As they huddled closer to the fire, Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. A small cairn of stacked stones in the far corner of the cove, partially hidden behind a boulder. Atop the cairn sat what looked like a tattered backpack, the fabric bleached by sun and weather. "Darius," she hissed, pointing. "Look." Before Darius could respond, a sharp clatter of falling rocks sounded from the darkness above. Everyone froze. In the sudden silence that followed, they all heard it clearly. The sound of something heavy moving along the canyon wall directly overhead. And then, a distinct hiss that sounded almost like words. Asterisk fresh meat asterisk. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. After the unnerving sound ceased around midnight, the group had taken turns keeping watch, though nobody slept well. Maya had volunteered for the final shift, witnessing the gradual transformation as darkness gave way to the pale light of morning. "Everyone up," she called, nudging Darius's sleeping form with her foot. "We need to talk." As the group assembled around the dead campfire, Maya pointed to the cairn and backpack she discovered the night before. In daylight, the sight was even more disturbing. The backpack wasn't alone. Half buried in the sand were other items: a crushed GoPro camera, a dented water bottle, and what appeared to be a torn fragment of a wetsuit. "These aren't old," Trent said, examining the items. "This GoPro is a model from last year." Kayla knelt beside the cairn. "This looks like some kind of memorial. Or a warning," Chris added quietly. Darius crossed his arms defensively. "Look, people lose stuff on the river all the time. Probably washed up here during high water. And arranged itself in a neat pile," Maya challenged. "We need to report this to the rangers and get out of here." "With what?" Darius countered. "Our satellite phone barely has reception in these deep sections, and we'd have to paddle back upstream to reach the nearest ranger station. That's a full day's journey. Then we continue downstream to Phantom Ranch," Maya insisted. "It's only about 12 miles. We can make it by afternoon if we push hard." The debate was interrupted by a gasp from Chris, who had wandered toward the entrance of their cove. "Guys, the rafts." They rushed to join him, only to find 2 of their 5 rafts slashed open, the thick rubber torn by what looked like massive claws. The remaining 3 rafts were intact but partially deflated. "What the hell could do this?" Trent whispered, running his fingers along the jagged tiers. Darius examined the damage, his earlier bravado evaporating. "We can repair them, but it'll take time. And we'll need to redistribute our gear to the 3 salvageable rafts." "Time we don't have," Maya said. "Whatever did this might come back." Kayla had been unusually quiet, staring up at the canyon walls with a troubled expression. "I think I know why this place feels wrong," she finally said. "Look at the rock formation above us." They followed her gaze to where she pointed at the striated red walls. "This entire section shows signs of unusual erosion patterns, but they're not natural. These look like tunnels, bored into the rock face." "By what?" Chris asked. "I don't know," Kayla admitted. "But whatever it is has been here a long time. These modifications to the rock are extensive." As they worked to repair the rafts, the group kept scanning the cliffs nervously. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating more of the canyon walls. From their new vantage point, they could see dozens of similar crevices dotting the rock face, some barely visible unless you knew what to look for. "There's a legend among some of the local tribes," Trent said as he patched one of the rafts, "about creatures that live in the canyon walls. The Hualapai call them team cave crawlers. They're supposed to be ancient beings that hunt at night." "That's just a story," Darius said. though he didn't sound convinced. Most legends have some basis in fact, Kayla replied. Indigenous peoples documented their observations through oral tradition. By midday, they had managed to repair 2 of the damaged rafts, though the patches were less than ideal. Their plan was to load the 3 most seaworthy rafts with essential gear and abandon the rest. As Maya inventoried their supplies, she made another disturbing discovery. Their food stores had been ransacked. Nearly half their provisions were missing. It knew exactly what to take, she said. This wasn't an animal scavenging randomly. Intelligence doesn't mean human, Kayla remarked. Many predators learn patterns. As they prepared to leave, Chris noticed something glinting in the sand near where they'd found the backpack. Digging it out, he held up a metal tag from a standard-issue National Park Service uniform. Ranger Thompson, he read aloud. Date of service, 2022 to 2023. A heavy silence fell over the group. We need to go. Now, Maya said, her voice brooking no argument. They loaded the rafts with grim efficiency, constantly glancing at the canyon walls above. The plan was to reach Phantom Ranch before nightfall, a challenging journey, but possible if they maintained a steady pace and the current cooperated. Just as they were about to push off, a faint cry echoed through the canyon, a human voice calling for help. "Hello, anybody down there? Help me." They froze, scanning the cliff face. About 30 feet up, wedged in a narrow crevice, was what appeared to be a person. "Oh my God," Kayla whispered. "Someone's trapped up there." "Hello," Darius called back. "Are you hurt? Can you climb down?" The figure moved slightly, revealing a dirt-streaked face. "My leg's broken. I've been stuck here for 2 days. Please help me." "We can't just leave them," Chris said. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the canyon's shadows. Something wasn't right. The voice sounded strange, almost rehearsed. "Darius, don't," she started to say, but he was already moving toward the cliff face, looking for a way up. "I'm coming," he called to the figure. "Just hold on." As Darius began to climb, the trapped person shifted position, and Maya caught a glimpse of what looked like abnormally long fingers gripping the rock edge. Too long, with too many joints. "Darius, get down," she screamed, but it was too late. The figure lunged from its hiding place with inhuman speed, revealing not a person but something that only approximated human form. Its elongated limbs and pale skin made it look like a nightmarish spider as it scrambled down the rock face toward Darius. He barely had time to scream before the creature was on him. There was a sickening crack as it seized his arm, yanking him from his handhold. Darius fell 10 feet to the rocky ground, the creature following in a controlled descent, never releasing its grip. The others were frozen in horror until Trent broke the spell, charging forward with a paddle raised like a club. The creature looked up, revealing a face that was almost human but distorted, with eyes too large and a mouth that opened far wider than should be possible, filled with needle-like teeth. It hissed at Trent, then dragged the semi-conscious Darius toward one of the crevices with alarming speed. "No!" Maya screamed, finally jolted into action. She and Chris rushed forward, grabbing Darius's legs as the creature pulled him by the shoulders. For a moment, they were engaged in a macabre tug-of-war, with Darius moaning in pain between them. Then Kayla appeared with the emergency flare gun from one of the rafts. She fired directly at the creature, the red flare catching it in what passed for its face. It released Darius with an unearthly shriek, retreating into the shadows of the crevice. "Get him to the rafts, now," Maya commanded. As they dragged Darius toward the water, multiple clicking sounds echoed from different points along the canyon wall. Looking up in horror, they saw movement in at least 3 other crevices, pale shapes shifting in the darkness. They weren't alone, and night was only hours away. The current carried them swiftly downstream, each bend in the river increasing the distance from the hidden cove and its horrors. Darius lay unconscious in the middle raft, his right arm mangled where the creature had gripped him. Maya had applied a tourniquet and bandaged the wound as best she could, but he needed proper medical attention soon. What the hell were those things? Chris kept repeating, his knuckles white as he gripped his paddle. I don't know, Kayla replied, her geologist's mind racing to make sense of what they'd seen. Some kind of isolated evolution, maybe. Species can adapt to extreme environments in surprising ways. Those weren't animals, Trent said firmly. Did you see how it mimicked a human voice? That's not instinct, that's calculated hunting behavior. Maya kept her eyes fixed on the canyon walls as they traveled, watching for movement in the countless crevices and shadows. The enormity of the Grand Canyon, once majestic, now felt oppressive, a vast hunting ground where they were exposed and vulnerable. They passed Hermit Rapids, then Crystal, the violence of the white water forcing them to focus on navigation. Under normal circumstances, they would have stopped to scout the rapids before attempting them, but fear drove them forward. Better to risk the river than what lurked in the canyon. By late afternoon, they'd made good progress, but Phantom Ranch was still miles away, and the sun was beginning its descent. We can't be on the water after dark, Maya said as they pulled into a small eddy to regroup. But we can't stop here either. What about there? Chris pointed to a narrow beach on River Right, where a National Park Service trail marker was visible. That's Bright Angel Trail. It leads up to the south rim. 9 miles of switchbacks, Kayla noted. No way we could carry Darius up that before nightfall. What about the emergency shelter? Trent suggested. I remember reading there's a ranger emergency shelter at the Bright Angel campground, near where the trail meets the river. Maya checked their tattered map. You're right, it's not far from here. If we can reach it, we might find medical supplies, maybe even a working radio. With renewed purpose, they pushed back into the current. Darius had regained consciousness but was delirious with fever, mumbling about shadows and teeth. The wound on his arm had taken on an unhealthy color, with dark lines spreading toward his shoulder. As they approached the Bright Angel Creek Delta, they spotted the campground, and with it, the small emergency shelter, a sturdy stone cabin set back from the river. Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. Look, Chris said quietly, pointing to the shelter. Even from the river they could see the door was ajar, hanging crookedly from one hinge. They beached their rafts 100 yards downstream from the campground, hiding them as best they could among the boulders. Maya and Trent went ahead to scout while Kayla and Chris stayed with Darius. The campground was deserted, not surprising given that it was off-season and permits for this section were limited. As they approached the shelter, Maya felt a growing sense of dread. The door hadn't just been forced, it had been torn from its frame, the metal hinges twisted and bent. Inside, they found chaos. First aid supplies were scattered across the floor, and the emergency radio had been smashed. The walls bore the same claw marks they'd seen in the hidden cove. They've been here too, Trent whispered, his voice tight with fear. But why? Maya wondered. There's nothing to eat here, no one to hunt. Trent picked up the remains of a logbook, its pages torn and stained. Maybe they're not just hunting for food. Maybe they're eliminating threats. A chilling thought occurred to Maya. Or expanding their territory. They salvaged what medical supplies they could find and returned to the others. The news of the ransacked shelter hit everyone hard. Their best hope now was to continue downstream to Phantom Ranch proper, where there would be park personnel and visitors. We've only got about an hour of daylight left, Chris observed, looking anxiously at the sky. And at least 2 hours to Phantom Ranch, Kayla added. The implication was clear. They would be on the river after dark. As they prepared to launch the rafts again, Darius's condition deteriorated. The dark lines now extended past his shoulder, and his skin burned with fever. "I've never seen an infection progress this quickly," Kayla said, pressing a fresh cold compress to his forehead. "It's like some kind of venom. We need to move," Maya decided. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." They pushed off into the current once more, the canyon walls turning blood-red in the setting sun. Maya couldn't help but think of the old river guide's warning before they started their trip. The canyon gives life with one hand and takes it with the other. Respect her rules or pay the price. How foolish they'd been to ignore those rules. As darkness fell, they rigged their headlamps to the fronts of the rafts, the weak beams barely penetrating the gloom ahead. The river had widened and calmed in this section, but that brought little comfort. The slower current meant slower progress. An hour into their night journey, they heard it, the now familiar clicking sound, echoing across the water from the canyon walls. It was answered by another click from the opposite side of the river, then another further downstream. "They're tracking us," Chris whispered, his paddle frozen mid-stroke. Maya shone her light toward the canyon wall, where the beam caught a flash of movement, something pale and elongated slithering between rocks hundreds of feet above the river. "Keep paddling," she ordered. "Eyes forward, don't look at them." But it was impossible not to look when a splash sounded to their right. Something had dropped into the water from the cliff face, something that now moved beneath the surface, creating a V-shaped wake that headed straight for the rafts. "Paddle," Maya screamed. "Faster." They drove their paddles into the black water with desperate strength. Behind them, the wake gained speed. Suddenly, Darius sat bolt upright in the middle raft, his eyes wide and unfocused. "They're in the water," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his own. "They've always been in the water." Before anyone could respond, something struck the bottom of Maya's raft with enormous force, nearly capsizing it. She glimpsed a pale limb, longer and thinner than a human arm, reaching over the side of the raft before it disappeared back into the depths. "Head for shore," Trent yelled. "We can't fight them on the water." Maya directed them toward a narrow shelf of rock jutting from the canyon wall. It wasn't ideal, but it would get them off the river. As they approached, another creature dropped from above, landing with a sickening splash mere feet from Chris's raft. They abandoned the rafts at the rocky shore, dragging Darius to relative safety, while two more pale shapes circled in the water nearby. The narrow ledge offered minimal protection, with solid canyon wall behind them and open water before them. "Now what?" Chris panted, his face a mask of terror in the dim light. Maya pulled the flare gun from her pack, their last defense. "Now we make our stand." As if in response, a wet, slithering sound came from above. Looking up, they saw what they'd been fleeing. Three creatures descending the sheer cliff face with uncanny agility, their elongated limbs finding invisible holds in the rock. In the harsh light of their headlamps, the creature's features were finally fully visible. Humanoid but wrong, with oversized joints that bent in impossible directions and skin so pale it was nearly translucent, revealing a network of dark veins beneath. Where their faces should have been were nightmarish approximations of human features. Sunken eye sockets holding milky orbs without pupils, flattened nose slits, and mouths that stretched from ear to ear, filled with translucent needle teeth. As the creatures crept closer, Darius began to convulse violently, the dark lines from his wound now covering his entire arm and spreading across his chest. "Maya," Kayla called urgently, "I think they're communicating with him somehow, through the bite or scratch or whatever it is." The nearest creature opened its mouth, emitting not a hiss this time but a series of rapid clicks and what sounded disturbingly like words. "Hours now. All hours." Darius suddenly went rigid, then turned to look at them with eyes that held no recognition, only a horrible, alien hunger. "He's turning into one of them," Chris whispered, backing away from Darius. Maya kept the flare gun trained on the creatures descending the cliff face, but her mind raced through their dwindling options. They were trapped on a narrow ledge with hostiles closing in from above and the river at their backs. We need to get back on the water, she decided. It's our only chance. They're in the water too, Trent reminded her, gesturing to the pale shape still circling their abandoned rafts. Not all of them, Maya replied, and we can move faster on the river than on foot, especially with Darius in this condition. At the mention of his name, Darius let out a guttural moan. His body contorted unnaturally, joints bending at impossible angles as he tried to rise. The infection or venom or whatever it was had spread visibly across his torso, dark lines pulsing beneath his skin. "We can't take him with us," Kayla said, her voice breaking. "Look at him, Maya, he's not Darius anymore." Maya knew she was right, but the thought of abandoning their friend was unbearable. Yet as Darius turned his head toward them, his eyes were clouded white, reflecting their headlamp beams like a nocturnal animal's. One of the creatures had reached a point directly above them, pausing to observe. It emitted a series of clicks that Darius seemed to respond to, his head tilting at the same unnatural angle. They're communicating, Trent realized, using Darius somehow. The creature above them bared its needle teeth in what looked disturbingly like a smile, then spoke in a voice that was a horrific approximation of human speech. "Join colony. Become better. Stronger." Chris snapped. He grabbed a rock and hurled it at the creature, striking it squarely. It hissed in pain but didn't retreat. "We need a diversion," Maya whispered to the others. "Something to draw them away from the rafts." Kayla nodded grimly. "I'll do it. I'm the strongest swimmer if things go wrong." Before Maya could protest, Kayla had grabbed their remaining emergency flare. Not a flare gun, but a handheld marine flare. She struck it against the rock, and it burst into brilliant red light, temporarily blinding the creatures, who recoiled with shrieks of pain. "G.O.," Kayla yelled, running along the narrow shore away from the rafts, waving the flare high. The creatures on the cliff face immediately changed direction, scrambling after the light with disturbing speed. Maya, Chris, and Trent dragged the semi-conscious Darius back toward the rafts. The water-dwelling creatures had retreated from the harsh flare light, but they wouldn't stay away for long. "What about Kayla?" Chris asked as they reached the rafts. "She'll circle back," Maya assured him, hoping it was true. "Help me get these back in the water." They managed to push 2 rafts into the current. As they were loading Darius onto one, his body suddenly went rigid. His back arched at an impossible angle, and a sound emerged from his throat that was no longer human, a perfect mimicry of the creature's clicking language. His eyes snapped open, now completely white, and he lunged at Trent with inhuman strength, fingers curved into claws. They tumbled into the shallow water, Darius on top, driving Trent's head underwater. "Help!" Chris cried, wading in to pull Darius off. Maya hesitated only a second before raising the flare gun and firing. The flare struck Darius in the shoulder, and he released Trent with a shriek that no human throat could produce. As Trent surfaced, gasping for air, Darius retreated into deeper water, the flare sizzling against his skin. "Get in the raft," Maya ordered, helping the coughing Trent to his feet. They scrambled into the remaining raft, pushing off into the current as Darius watched from the shallows, his head tilted at that unnatural angle, white eyes reflecting their headlamp beams. "What about Kayla?" Chris repeated, more urgently this time. As if in answer, a scream echoed through the canyon, Kayla's voice, cut short by a series of triumphant clicks. "Oh God," Trent whispered. "They got her." "Keep paddling," Maya said, forcing steel into her voice even as tears streamed down her face. "We can't help her now." The current carried them away from the shoreline, the darkness of the canyon enveloping them once more. They paddled in grim silence, jumping at every sound, every shadow on the water. An hour passed, then two. The canyon widened slightly, the river becoming calmer. They began to dare hope they'd outrun the creatures. Then Chris stiffened. "Listen." At first, Maya heard nothing. Then it came to her, a faint but rhythmic splashing behind them. Something was following in their wake. Trent aimed his headlamp backward, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a sight that froze their blood. Kayla swimming with unnatural speed and precision, her movements more fish than human. Even at this distance, they could see her eyes reflecting the light, white and pupilless. "Faster," Maya urged, her arms burning with fatigue as she dug her paddle deeper. But Kayla, or what had once been Kayla, was gaining on them, her powerful strokes eating up the distance between them. Behind her, more shapes moved in the water, the pale creatures, using her to track their prey. "We can't outrun them," Trent said, his voice hollow with defeat. Maya refused to give up. "Phantom Ranch can't be far now. If we can just make it there." "And then what?" Chris demanded. "You saw what happened to Darius and Kayla. What's to stop these things from taking over the whole place?" He had a point. If the creatures could convert humans so quickly, Phantom Ranch could already be compromised. And if not, leading the creatures there would endanger everyone. Maya's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. Then she remembered something from the map, a feature of the river not far ahead. "Sockdolager Rapids," she said. "It's one of the biggest drops on this section. Class 10 rapids." "We can't run that in the dark," Trent protested. "We don't have to run it," Maya replied. "We just have to let them follow us into it." Understanding dawned on their faces. The creatures were adapted for the canyon's unique environment, but even they couldn't survive being smashed against rocks in Class 10 rapids. "But we'll die too," Chris pointed out. "Not if we beach just before the rapids," Maya explained. "There's a trail marker there, Kaibab Trail. It's another path to the rim." It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had. They paddled with renewed vigor, despite their exhaustion. Behind them, the pursuing shapes drew ever closer, Kayla in the lead, her movements becoming more alien with every stroke. The sound of rushing water grew louder ahead, the rapids approaching. Maya strained her eyes in the darkness, looking for the beach and trail marker she remembered from the map. "There," Trent called, pointing to a slight widening on river left. They angled the raft toward shore, fighting the current that wanted to pull them toward the rapids. Behind them, Kayla let out a series of clicks that were answered from multiple directions, the creatures converging for the kill. The raft scraped bottom and they leapt out, dragging it onto the small beach. The roar of Sockdolager Rapids filled the air, a thundering promise of destruction just around the bend. "Get to the trail," Maya ordered, grabbing her pack. "I'll catch up." "What are you doing?" Chris demanded. "Making sure they follow the raft, not us." Before they could argue, Maya had pushed the empty raft back into the current. It spun slowly, caught in the flow, drifting toward the rapids. Then she rejoined the others, and they scrambled up the steep bank toward where the trail marker should be. Behind them came splashing sounds as their pursuers reached the shore. Maya risked a glance back to see Kayla emerging from the water, her movements jerky and insect-like, her head swiveling unnaturally as she sought their scent. Behind her, at least 5 of the pale creatures crawled onto the beach. For a moment, Maya thought her plan had failed. The creatures had ignored the empty raft. Then one of them spotted it drifting toward the rapids and let out an urgent series of clicks. The group immediately changed direction, slithering with frightening speed toward the raft, apparently believing their prey was still aboard. Maya, Chris, and Trent watched from the safety of the trail as the creatures intercepted the raft just as it entered the rapids. Their triumphant clicks turned to shrieks as the current seized them, smashing the raft and its unwanted passengers against the first of many massive boulders. The last they saw of the creatures was Kayla's white eyes reflecting the moonlight as she was pulled under, one arm reaching toward shore in a final, desperate gesture that seemed almost human. The Kaibab trail wound steeply upward from the river, switchbacking through the layered rock of the inner gorge. Maya, Chris, and Trent climbed in silence, each step carrying them further from the horrors below but deeper into exhaustion. Their headlamp batteries were fading, the beams growing dimmer with each passing hour. "Do you think we got them all?" Chris finally asked, his voice barely audible over their labored breathing. "No," Maya answered truthfully. "Those were just the ones that followed us. There could be dozens more, hundreds even, throughout the canyon. How could something like that exist without being discovered?" Trent wondered. "The Grand Canyon gets millions of visitors every year. Most stick to designated areas, marked trails," Maya pointed out. "And these things are clearly nocturnal. How many people camp illegally in the canyon at night?" "Enough to feed them, apparently," Chris said grimly. They had been climbing for nearly 3 hours when they reached a natural plateau and collapsed in exhaustion. Dawn was still at least 2 hours away, but they could go no further without rest. "We'll take turns keeping watch," Maya decided. 20 minutes each, then wake the next person. But exhaustion claimed them all, and it was the first gray light of dawn that finally woke Maya. She sat up with a jolt, momentarily disoriented, then remembered with crushing clarity the events of the night before. Darius and Kayla lost, the creatures in the canyon, their desperate flight. Chris and Trent still slept nearby, their faces haggard even in repose. Maya checked her watch, 5:47 a.m. They'd slept for nearly 3 hours. She scanned their surroundings, now visible in the pre-dawn light. The plateau they'd stopped on offered a commanding view of the canyon below, the Colorado River a distant silver thread winding through the rock. No sign of pursuit. Perhaps they'd actually managed to eliminate their immediate hunters at the rapids. She allowed herself a moment of hope before reality reasserted itself. They were still miles from the rim, with minimal supplies and no communication with the outside world. She gently woke the others, and they shared the last of their water and energy bars in silence. As they prepared to continue their ascent, Trent suddenly froze, staring at something on the canyon wall nearby. "Look," he whispered, pointing to what appeared to be ancient petroglyphs carved into the red rock. They crowded around the faded images, stick figures with elongated limbs surrounding smaller human figures. Above them were wavy lines that might represent water and a circular symbol that could be the sun or moon. "Is that them?" Chris asked. "The creatures?" "I think so," Maya replied. Kayla would have known, she thought with a fresh stab of grief. Trent traced the images with his fingertip, careful not to touch the fragile carvings. "These look like ancestral Puebloan work, maybe 1,000 years old. So these things have been here that long." Chris's voice was hollow. "Or longer," Maya said. "The indigenous peoples would have known about them, documented them in their way." As the sun crept higher, they continued their ascent, the trail becoming steeper and more challenging. Their muscles screamed in protest, but fear drove them forward. None of them voiced the shared dread that the creatures might be able to tolerate sunlight better than they'd assumed. By mid-morning, they'd reached the Tonto platform, a wide shelf that offered spectacular views across the canyon. In daylight, the grandeur of the landscape was breathtaking, layers of red, orange, and tan rock stretching to the horizon, carved by millennia of wind and water into fantastic shapes. Hard to believe that something so beautiful could harbor such horror. "There's Phantom Ranch," Trent said, pointing far below to a cluster of buildings beside the river. From this height, it looked peaceful, undisturbed. "Should we try to reach it?" Chris asked. "Warn them." Maya considered their options. "The fastest way out is still up. If we make it to the rim by afternoon, we can alert the rangers, get a proper search and rescue team mobilized. With guns, Trent added grimly. They pushed on, the sun now high overhead, beating down mercilessly. Their water was gone, and dehydration was becoming a serious threat. The upper sections of the Kaibab Trail were exposed, offering little shade from the relentless sun. Just a few more switchbacks, Maya encouraged, though her own steps were becoming unsteady. It was past 2 in the afternoon when they finally rounded the last bend and saw it. The South Rim entrance station, with its rustic wooden sign welcoming visitors to Grand Canyon National Park. A handful of tourists milled about, taking photos, completely unaware of the nightmare that lived in the depths below. The 3 survivors staggered toward the ranger station, their appearance drawing concerned looks from visitors. Sunburned, dehydrated, covered in dirt and dried river water, they must have looked half dead. A park ranger emerged from the station, immediately assessing their condition with professional efficiency. "Medical emergency here," she called to a colleague inside. Within minutes they were receiving first aid, gulping down water, trying to explain through parched lips what they'd encountered. "Creatures," Maya croaked, "in the canyon walls. They took Darius and Kayla." The ranger exchanged a look with her colleague that Maya couldn't interpret, concern, certainly, but something else too. Recognition. "You were on an overnight river trip?" the ranger asked. "Outside the permitted camping areas." "Yes," Maya admitted, "but that's not important now. You need to warn people, evacuate Phantom Ranch." The ranger nodded soothingly. "We'll get search and rescue down there right away for your friends. A chopper can be there in 20 minutes. "You don't understand," Trent insisted. "These aren't normal predators. They change people. Darius and Kayla aren't themselves anymore." The senior ranger, a weathered man with gray at his temples, stepped forward. "Why don't you come inside and tell us exactly what you saw? We take all reports seriously." As they were led into the air-conditioned ranger station, Maya noticed a topographical map of the canyon on the wall. Red pins marked various locations along the river, including the hidden cove where their nightmare had begun. "Those pins," she said, pointing, "what do they represent?" The rangers exchanged another loaded glance before the senior one answered. "Missing persons, scattered over the past 50 years. You know," Chris realized. "You know about the creatures." The senior ranger closed the door and lowered his voice. "What we know is that the Grand Canyon has always been dangerous. People vanish. Sometimes we find remains, sometimes not. There are stories, legends, things the local tribes have warned about for centuries." "But you've seen them," Maya pressed. The ranger's weathered face gave nothing away. "What I've seen is what happens when people disrespect the canyon's rules. Nature has ways of enforcing its boundaries." "Those things weren't natural," Trent insisted. "Maybe they are," the ranger replied enigmatically. "Just not the kind of nature we understand." As medical personnel arrived and began treating them more thoroughly, Maya caught fragments of radio communication. "A special containment team. Protocol 7. Keep this quiet." She met the senior ranger's eyes across the room and knew the truth. The authorities were aware of what lived in the canyon depths, but kept it secret to prevent panic, and perhaps because they had no way to fight it. Instead, they enforced camping regulations and permit requirements, sacrificing the occasional rule breaker to maintain an uneasy truce with the canyon's ancient inhabitants. That night, from her hospital bed, Maya watched the news. There was no mention of their ordeal, no evacuation at Phantom Ranch. Just the usual report of 2 more visitors who had strayed from marked trails and were presumed lost to the elements. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, Maya wondered how many of the 5 million annual visitors to the Grand Canyon ever suspected what watched them from the shadows of the ancient rock walls? How many realized that for all humanity's supposed dominance, there were still places on Earth where they were nothing more than prey? In her dreams, she stood once more on the south rim, gazing across the vast chasm as the sun set, painting the canyon walls blood-red. Far below, countless white eyes opened in the growing darkness, and the clicking began. In the morning, she would be told it had all been a hallucination, the result of extreme dehydration and trauma. Most survivors of desert ordeals experienced similar delusions, they'd say. The bodies of her friends would never be found. And next season, new permits would be issued, new rafters would float the Colorado, and the Grand Canyon would keep its secrets for another year, until someone else camped where they shouldn't after dark.